Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today is Professor Mohammad Marandi. You've seen him on here before. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Hi, Sabrina. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, these are very interesting times, the way that 2026 is starting off. I'm starting to see similarities with the way things started in 2025. Donald Trump has made a statement about the protest in Iran, and I do want to share this here so that people can see what he said. So Donald Trump said, if Iran shoots, I think he means shoots, not shots. If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So the question that I think a lot of people have here is, number one, if you can discuss what are these protests that are happening in Iran? Where is this coming from? Is this are these protests actually outside agitators that are influencing people there? Is this something that the CIA is doing? And then also this idea about Donald Trump coming in and liberating people in Iran.
Yeah, well, he's into this whole liberation thing. So, in Venezuela and in Nigeria and in South Africa and everywhere, well, actually, it's interesting that he made this tweet because let's say if it's, as he said, our, as if it's our custom to kill protesters, then he's going to come and kill thousands of people, basically. So because any military intervention means a lot of people are going to die. In Venezuela, large numbers of people have died. I was just speaking to a friend of mine in Venezuela. He said civilians were killed, government employees were killed, uh, soldiers were killed. Most of the president's team, his security, they were murdered by the Americans. That's what war does. So, but in any case, what happened was that the United States, as we all know, has been imposing sanctions on Iran, targeting ordinary people for decades. And people die as a result. So, for example, you have limited spare parts for your airplanes. You have a shortage of certain medicines at times. Let's say you have God forbid, a cancer patient in your family and you need a certain medicine and it's not there. Or the price is so high that you can't pay for it. You just can't pay for it. Let's say someone is wealthy and they can sell their apartment or their car or something, and someone just doesn't have that money. So that's what sanctions does. That's what it does. It kills people. It destroys lives. It destroys um, communities. It destroys families. People lose their jobs. Their families fall apart. So that was the objective from the very beginning. The saying, both in Venezuela and in Iran and elsewhere in Cuba or in Syria. They not only carried out a dirty war, not only did they steal their oil, but they imposed sanctions so that people would suffer, to bring them to their knees so that they would rise up against the government. That is the whole point. Now, in Iran, these sanctions have been in place for many years. And under Obama, they took it a step further and imposed maximum pressure sanctions. And Trump intensified those maximum pressure sanctions. So recently, we had a drop in the currency, which happens every now and then in Iran, partially because of the, well, there are lots of reasons, but part of it is the sanctions. Part of it is, of course, problems with the economy. Now, when the currency dropped in the city center, in a district sort of in the middle of Tehran, some of the businessmen went to the streets, and women, I suppose, business people, they went to the streets and they protested. I don't know what their numbers were, maybe 1,000 or two, or I don't know. But they were concerned because when the currency goes down like 20, 30%, they sell goods and then they can't buy new goods because they don't have enough money. They sell with a certain profit, and then suddenly the price of the goods goes up a great deal, and they can go bankrupt, or they just don't have customers anymore because the price goes so high that you can't afford certain goods, and so these people can't sell. In any case, they went to the streets and protested, and that's a legitimate right and a legitimate concern. And nothing happened. There was no violence. There was no heavy-handed police intervention or anything like that. Whereas in Europe and the United States, we've seen what's happened over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. In the UK, you hold a 80-year-old woman holding a placard, a no to genocide, and they take her off to jail, often very violently. Especially in Germany, we've seen lots of violence. Nothing happened. What happened was on day two. Suddenly, and this happened 3.5 years ago. I think it was roughly 3.5 years ago over Mahsa Amini. And we discussed this once before. Mahsa Amini, when she died, they were the Persian media in the West, BBC Persian and all these other media outlets. They carried out this campaign that she was beaten to death, that they hit her in the head and they tortured her and she died. And for 3 days, a lot of people went to the streets, maybe 10,000, 20,000, big, much bigger than what we saw in Tehran a few days ago. And people were upset. And then after 3 days, the footage came out and it showed that when she was in the police station, now, whether, the issue is not whether they should have taken her to the police station. That's a different issue altogether. But she was fine. Physically, she didn't look hurt. There was no sign of her. So, but by then it was too late. I mean, three people had already come to the streets, but then you had these small groups who infiltrated the peaceful protesters. Back then you had peaceful protests and then the infiltrators after I think the end of day two. Here it was after the end of day one. Those protesters were bigger, these were smaller. Small groups now are also smaller than back then. I guess it's because after the 12-day war, a lot of, infiltration and so on was discovered. So, but a lot of them are small cells that are funded from abroad. And these are not the protesters. The protesters, day one, peaceful. On day two or three, four, there were small protests here and there that were peaceful. But most of what we've been seeing are small groups of people in different towns and city, 50 people, 20 people, 60 people, who are extremely violent. And not all of them, but many of them, it turns out that they are funded from abroad. They get paid with Bitcoin. They get into contact with people abroad through social media, and they carry out violent acts and they film them and they send them to their handlers, and their handlers give them. Often they don't even know each other. They say, you go to this place, have your face covered. You'll be met with, four or five other people, and then you work together, and then, that's how it works. And I've been posting this just like 3.5 years ago. They're extremely violent. One of the tweets that I put out was this man using a flamethrower at the police, and he set a policeman on fire on his motorcycle. Another man threw a Molotov cocktail, or maybe, I don't know, something that was in flames. Someone said it was a plastic tire. It was a tire that they put on fire, and you know how horrible that is. And then the police officer was on fire. And I just posted something a few hours ago where they were beating this police officer to a pulp, and women came to rescue him. And and then there's others where they're shooting in the air and they have guns, and so these are, but in the West, through AI, through using old footage, or just like in Venezuela. I don't know if you've seen today, these huge crowds celebrating, and it turns out this is Argentina, or this was Miami, or it was like a few years ago in Venezuela. That's how they're manipulating. And then I saw one of these images. I don't know which one of these, but it was like footage, and it had over 100,000 likes. People in Venezuela celebrating, and it was all fake because the footage belonged to somewhere else or some other period of time. So this is exactly the same model that they're using. They misinformation, manipulation, AI. Not that nothing happens. I'm not saying that there is no police brutality in Iran, that no innocent people are beaten, or No, Iran is a country, an ordinary country like other countries. It has corrupt people, there's good people, there's bad cops, it has good cops, it's just like everywhere else. But in Iran, the protesters on day one, they did their protest peaceful. On campus, we had a couple of hundred students, 100 or 200 students on at my university. They protested, I think, on day two. No one had anything, no one did anything to them. But in the West, over the last few years, we've been seeing violence, but yet it is Iran that somehow is the nasty and sinister actor in all this. And we saw, as you know, I think, I'm sure, because you're more politically aware than I am, Pompeo's tweet, where the former head of the CIA goes and tweets that, well, if you have it with you, then maybe you can put it on the screen.
Yeah, I was gonna tell you, I was gonna show that one because this is very damning. This is the message from Mike Pompeo. The Iranian regime is in trouble. Bringing in mercenaries is its last best hope. Riots in dozens of cities and the Basij under siege, Mashhad, Tehran, Zahidin. Next stop,
Sahiden.
Zahidin. Next stop, Baluchistan. 47 years of this regime. POTUS 47, coincidence. And he said this right here. Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them. And, you know, with this administration, when you compare it to the Biden administration, this administration is more overt. It's just right out there in the open. You really don't have to look as hard, but they're putting that message just boldly out there. And a lot of people are of
I
course,
mean,
like,
Sabrina, compare it to Venezuela. You
right.
saw Trump's when he spoke yesterday at the press conference. He just says the silent part out loud. It's our oil. It's ours. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And that's a good thing. I mean, it's not as if he's really all that different from his predecessors. They were just smarter when it came to soft power.
Yeah.
What Trump did basically was he told all Venezuelans that, look, you don't own anything. It's mine now. So what does that do? It unites the people of Venezuela in a way that wouldn't have been possible without him doing it. And I have no doubt that Trump is going to fail in Venezuela. There has not been regime change. The president is a hostage. And the acting president, she's in charge. And the cabinet is in place, and the people are on the streets. As you and I are speaking, there's a big gathering taking place in the capital. Huge. I mean, my friends who are in Venezuela, I had the pleasure of visiting the country on multiple occasions. And it's completely different, by the way. I'm sorry from going from Iran to Venezuela, just because it's so important. First of all, a lot of talk about Venezuela is utter nonsense. It is not a communist country. They have private sector and public sector. But the government does focus on the disenfranchised. And it's sort of like Iran in many respects, more respects than people think. They are religious people. It's overwhelmingly Catholic. It's the only difference is that their Christ, our Jesus, is supports the oppressed, supports the victims. And the Christian Zionists, for some strange reason, they claim that Jesus supports genocide. But, so their Christianity is, I mean, they're religious people. They're not communists. And people have come to the streets in support of their president who's a hostage. So what Trump does and what Pompeo does in tweets like this is he creates greater awareness. So Iranians, they look at the former head of the CIA and say, look, he's saying it himself that the Mossad is a. So I don't have to go and argue with anyone and say, look, the Americans are behind it, whether, maybe a senior official will come on television and say, look, we've captured these people and that they're being paid from abroad. Someone could say, well, you're making this up or you're forcing confessions. They can make all, the guy is saying it himself. The Mossad agents are there with them. So this regime is very out there in the open. It's very overt, as you rightly put it, and I welcome that. I think that's a very good thing. I think that Trump's, just like Pompeo, Trump's speech yesterday, or his press conference yesterday, was an eye opener for people across Latin America and across the world. That this president is he's basically uh, he's behaving like this is the 19th century.
Right.
The pillage of Africa, the conquistadors going in and taking over the Americas. That's how they appear. That's how it's like very out there in the open. The political correctness. This is about freedom and democracy and human rights and human values and protecting. That's all gone.
Yeah, you mentioned infiltration in the protest, and we've had that problem here in the United States as well, where whether it's been the George Floyd protest, whether it's been the Cop City protest, the pro-Palestinian protest, where there are a small group of infiltrators who will infiltrate these protests. And a lot of times they're the ones that cause the violent activity to make the whole movement look bad. There was infiltration in the civil rights movement as well as the women's movement. So people should know better, but
Occupy Wall Street too.
Occupy Wall Street, another one, right? So there's always going to be some type of infiltration. The big question that's coming from people now, there was a statement from the Iran's supreme leader where he said that we will take the highest, I guess, the highest stance. A lot of the responses to that have been, you need to arm up and prepare. And a lot of people are saying that Iran should not trust the predictions or what the West is saying. It should not even wait to see if the West is going to target it once again. Because my prediction is this: Israel is going to attack Iran again, probably sometime soon. And they're already setting the stage for that. So after this attack on Venezuela, at some point, Israel is going to attack Iran again. And what people are saying to the supreme leader of Iran is that you should not wait to try to even negotiate or have talks with the United States because they're going to attack anyway, and you need to prepare. And I'm curious what you think about that, because it's, as I've said to other countries, like, you should not trust that the West is going to do the right thing.
No, I agree 100%. And I think Ayatollah Khamenei, said that in his speech that negotiating with the United States is futile. And Iran has been preparing. Iran is not going to take anything that Trump says seriously, not just because he's dishonest, which he is, but because he's changing his mind literally every hour on some occasions. When it comes to Ukraine, we've seen him flip-flop on all different issues. So not only do we see him as sinister and controlled by the Zionists, and of course, the Epstein issue is probably very much, at least the way I see it, it is quite possible. I don't want to say 100%, but I'm quite confident that there's an element of Epstein in what he's doing in Venezuela. He wants to distract attention. There's a lot of Epstein in what he does in our region because the Israelis want it, and Epstein was an Israeli agent, and I'm sure that the Israelis have all the dirt on everyone, and they can use it whenever they want. And we know that that's what happened with Clinton.
Yeah.
But but all that aside, the Iranians are preparing for war, and they're strengthening their offensive capabilities. They're rethinking their defensive capabilities. They are working with countries that are friendly. They're also developing their own technologies, and the government is preparing itself also for war. So next time round, and of course, the aggression always begins with the West, and this is one, just like in Venezuela, just like we're not going. I doubt we will initiate any conflict because that is not what we do. But of course, I think Iran reserves the right to begin something because we have never accepted a ceasefire after the 12-day war. We accepted a halt in hostilities. But in any case, If they attack again, Iran is going to strike much harder. And another thing that is important, and I hate war and I hate anyone dying, whether it's an American soldier or a kid in Israel. I have no sympathy for Israeli soldiers who serve for this genocide, but American soldiers or any civilians or innocent people, um, I don't like anyone being killed. But Iran's main military defense capabilities is not directed at the Israeli regime. It's directed at the United States. It's directed towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean because for 3 decades, the Iranians have felt that the American government may attack. You recall Obama saying all options are on the table. This is something that president after president in the United States kept saying. So the Iranians have been preparing for a very long time. So those capabilities that we saw Iran use that forced the Israelis to seek a ceasefire, we saw Steve Bannon, right after the end of the war, say that the real story here is that during the last 3, 4 days, the Israelis were being badly hammered and they needed a ceasefire, and Trump saved them by getting the ceasefire. So they were losing, even though Iran was, caught off guard. And Iran knew they were going to attack, but they didn't know that they were going to attack the capital and attack leaders and try to assassinate the president and other political and military leaders. So Iran's real capabilities that far outweigh what we've seen in the 12-day war is directed towards the United States and those countries in the Persian Gulf that host American bases. And they have many, many tens of thousands of short-range missiles, mid-range missiles, because the Persian Gulf is not very wide. So if there's war with the United States, I mean, last time around, the United States only hit 3 bases. It was one strike. And the Iranians struck back at the US base in Qatar. And despite what Trump claimed, 6 missiles struck and destroyed very sensitive US assets there. That was a small strike on the behalf of the Americans and a proportionate response. If the United States gets into a battle with Iran, then Iran will take out those countries like the tiny countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf that are producing all that oil and gas. They're complicit. They're hosting American bases. And that would mean that energy prices go through the roof. And that would mean a global economic meltdown. Some Americans tell me, well, the United States is self-sufficient in oil. That doesn't help because the people who are producing the oil may make billions of dollars, but at those people who are using gasoline, who get gasoline at the gas station, or who, you are using or heating their homes, their prices will go through the roof, and that will create an economic meltdown. And of course, those who are making a lot of money will also ultimately, when the depression kicks in, they will lose a lot of money too. So the global economy is at risk, and the Iranians are making sure that the United States and the Israeli regime understand this. But we are preparing, and we know that the Israeli regime does not care about the United States. I mean, if it destroys or wrecks the U.S. economy or the global economy, that's not a concern for the Israelis nor Israeli First Service in the United States. So Iran has to be prepared to defend itself against U.S. aggression, but it has to be preparing itself against aggression from the Israeli regime. Because even if Iran is prepared to fight back with the United States, the Israeli regime, as I said, they don't care about the U.S. economy or the global economy. They'll sacrifice the United States interests any day.
That makes me think about Russia and China. Another thing that people are asking is like, where is Russia and China in all of this, right? Like, China just made a statement that they said they demand that the United States return Maduro. But again, that's just like a strongly worded letter. Maduro just met with Chinese officials. Apparently, that was his last appearance from what I saw before he was kidnapped in the middle of the night. So it's only a matter of time before the US government could also try to do the same thing in Russia and in China, like what they did to Maduro. And it's just all it takes is for China to say, you know what, we're not going to cooperate with you economically anymore. We're not going to let you have these rare earth minerals anymore. That's all it takes. And people are just asking, and I want to get your take on this because some people feel as though China and Russia need to come in and help. And then others say, well, they can't do that. They have to worry about their own people. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that it could get to that point where, or do you feel like they should step up more? Or do you feel like they just physically cannot?
Well, actually, when it comes to Russia, it is, they have gone further. I mean, from what I understand and from what the information that's out there, it does appear that the CIA was involved in the targeting of the presidential compound, which President Putin goes to. And that, of course, is extraordinarily dangerous and an escalation. So it's gone beyond Iran or now Venezuela. No, I think actually you're right. The Chinese are increasingly getting angry. They are because they know that at the end of the day, so at the end of the day, Sabrina, the United States hates Iran. I mean, the government hates Iran because Iran is opposed to the apartheid regime. This is it. I mean, if Iran gave up on supporting the Palestinian people, Iran would be like Turkey or Saudi Arabia. We would have no sanctions and there would be no problem.
Right.
The sacrifices that the Iranians are making is for Palestine and all the problems that we've had with the West over the last few decades and all the accusations have to do with Palestine. But in the Russians and the Chinese, they are the main issue. They're the main antagonists for the United States. The U.S. government hates Iran because of Zionism, but their rival in the world is China. And the Chinese know that the end game is to undermine China.
Right.
So they are concerned. They're deeply concerned. I've actually spoken with Chinese friends today. They're very upset about what's going on in Venezuela, and they feel insulted that right after the meeting between Chinese officials and President Maduro, that this act of war and act of aggression and this kidnapping took place. So what is happening is basically that the United States is isolating itself further and is creating greater convergence between countries like Iran, like Russia, like China. And you can imagine the same happening with certain Latin American countries. And beyond that, I think that people across Latin America are going to be outraged, even in countries that are controlled by right-wing governments that are close to Trump. The fact that Trump goes on television and in the press conferences speaks so like a thug, like a godfather, but not even like a godfather, like a thug about Venezuelan assets, I don't think it's going to go down well anywhere. And I think this is going to hurt the United States. Obviously, the people of Venezuela are going to suffer. People across the region, I mean, the people of Lebanon and Gaza in particular, and Yemen, they've all suffered because of the U.S. aggression and Israeli genocidal, the Israeli genocide. But the United States is becoming increasingly isolated, and it's uniting its enemies, not the enemies of the American people, but Trump and the Uniparty. So I don't think it's any of this is good for the United States. And as you rightly pointed out, the Chinese have the rare earths. They have other means to hurt the U.S. government. They can sell the bonds that they own in the United States. There are many things that they can do. It's and this is just not smart. I mean, it's sinister, it's evil, but it's not smart either. Sometimes someone is evil, sinister, and smart, or evil can be smart. But Trump is not behaving smart.
Yeah, Israel and Trump are using the excuse that Venezuela is working with Iran. They're also making statements that Hezbollah is in Venezuela, just throwing all types of things out
Everything.
there,
Yeah, it's
everything out
first
there.
it's drugs, and then it's the cartels, and then it's Hezbollah, and then it's Hamas, and then they say, forget it. It's the oil. The oil's ours, and step aside.
Yeah. And to me, this all just screams of an empire that is in economic decline. Because here's the reality. Like I said, I believe Israel is going to try to attack Iran sometime soon. Obviously, when that happens, that's going to create a situation with the oil for the United States. So I feel like that's another reason why they're targeting Venezuela, because they want to be able to get that oil from Venezuela when that happens. So they're basically preparing for all of that. And it just screams to me of an empire that is in economic decline. That is like, all empires fall. This is what people have to understand. And you can learn a lot about this for those who are watching from the Roman Empire. Every empire at some point it reaches its limit, and then there is a period of decline. And that is what I see happening here with the United States. And it's really weird to me how some people in the West really believe that Donald Trump cares about the Venezuelans, or he wants to help the people in Iran and he wants to liberate all these people when they're not even helping Americans right here.
Yeah, and like in Nigeria, for example, he says I'm worried about the Christians, but he's killing Christians in Venezuela. And then, by the way, these extremist groups in Nigeria, like Boko Haram, who are they affiliated to? Boko Haram is Wahhabi, they're Salafi. Who funds these Salafi groups? U.S. allies in the Persian Gulf region, the oil and gas-rich regimes that have been aiding ISIS and Al Qaeda with U.S. consent and full support, as we all know by now. They also that money also goes to groups like Boko Haram. So indirectly, it's the United States government that has been that is guilty of creating these extremist groups, regardless of the fact that what's happened in Nigeria, much of it has nothing to do with Boko Haram even, and it has very often very little to do with religion. It's just tribes fighting over land, and there are many issues in Nigeria. And I have some there. We have quite a few Nigerian students at our university, and some of them have enlightened me a bit about their country. But in any case, yes, you're 100% correct. I think Trump, he wants Venezuelan oil, and this would be even very, this would potentially be very helpful at a time that there's potential military conflict between Iran and the Israeli regime, or Trump and Netanyahu against Iran. But the problem is, Sabrina, you know, the Nobel War Prize lady, uh, why did Trump not support her as president? I think the reason is not just because she's unpopular, because he's united the nation and she supports intervention, and now people have died. And so people see her as a part of not because she's not legitimate in the eyes of Venezuelans, that's maybe a part of it, but because if she is the president, he has to take her to Venezuela, and then he has to put boots on the ground. As we speak, there are no boots on the ground. The United States, contrary to what Trump is saying, is not in control. The Venezuelan government is very much in control. So if Trump wants the oil, he's going to have to come and get it. The easy part is bombing people and slaughtering people from the air. That's the easy part. But if he wants to control the oil, he has to come and have boots on the ground. He's going to have to bring in tens of thousands of people and spend billions upon billions and probably trillions of dollars. And the Venezuelan people won't let him get away with it. People will the insurgency will begin. And I've been to Venezuela, as I told you. It's a beautiful country, Sabrina. It's a beautiful country. But it's mountains and forests. The worst possible place to fight an insurgency. The worst possible place. Iraq was flat land, and a lot of the south is desert.
Right.
And which is ideal for the Americans, for the invaders. But even in Iraq, they lost the war. Remember, mission accomplished? Well, how did that finish? Or when they say that the war in Iraq will not cost us anything, we'll make money from the oil. They're saying the same thing again now. They're congratulating themselves for kidnapping Maduro and his wife. And they're saying the oil is ours and that it's not going to cost, Trump said himself, it's not going to cost us anything. Well, we've heard all that before. I don't think this is going to end well in Venezuela. It is not going to end well for the United States, and especially the Israeli regime with Iran. But it's for the American people to to wake up, and many have, but more than before have to wake up and put pressure on Trump and the Uniparty and to bring about real change in the United States. Because why is it that, sometimes these Western journalists say to me, why do people in Iran chant death to America? And I mean, no one walks down the streets and chants death to America, like in a, in a rally or something. Sometimes they talk as if people are just walking down the street chanting death to America. And I said to them that, look, first of all, this is when they say death to America, it's about the US, it's about the empire. It has nothing to do with the American people. It's like when they would say Yankee go home back in the day when I was young, it wasn't like passport holders get on a plane and go. They meant the US government stay out of our affairs, leave our country alone. But it is this behavior of the empire that makes people across the world come to dislike the empire and to even more and the United States. Otherwise, does Iran, for example, have any problems with Brazil? Does Iran have any problems with Niger or South Africa or Bolivia or I don't know, Nicaragua? No. The problem is with those countries or those entities that seek to impose their will on others, or those countries that attach themselves to the empire, like the Europeans right now, or these tiny countries in the Persian Gulf region. That's the problem. But one thing that makes me optimistic in relative terms, is that in my lifetime, I've never seen people in the United States, so many people awake to reality. I think that is unique. And hopefully that's a sign of things to come.
Right. I'm seeing people, also conservatives, calling this out as well. People who were Trump supporters, who were diehard, go Trump, are very livid about what just happened in Venezuela, are calling out his statement to go in and liberate the people in Iran. They're not happy about this. And I think that, there is some type of a shift that is happening. And I think it really matters that you do have some of the conservative podcasters like Tucker Carlson and like Candace Owens who are calling this out. So I think that really does matter. And I
Even
think there
Steve
is
Bannon.
some and even Steve Bannon of all people. Yeah, I think it says a lot. And my hope is just that, more people stop falling for the okey doke. The whole thing with Iraq, like a lot of people here fell for that. And we're seeing some of those same strategies with Venezuela, with Iran. They'll just change it for a different reason, right? Like they'll say, well, Iran is trying to get nuclear capabilities and they want to destroy Israel. Well, Venezuela, they're like, oh, they've got drugs, so we have to go after them. But of course, Donald Trump just pardoned Juan Hernandez, who was a drug trafficker. So it all
400
just
tons,
goes
I
out the
think.
window. Huh?
400 tons of drugs. And they pardoned him.
Yep.
That's
It all just
that's the
goes out
world
the
we live in.
window. So I think those tactics and those talking points aren't working the way that they used to, and that does in a sense, give me some sort of hope. Now you mentioned Turkey. One thing I do want to add about this here, I often wonder how long the U.S. and Israel are going to get along with Turkey. I wonder how
That's a
long
good
before.
question. That's a good question because Turkey under Erdogan has been cooperating with the Israelis. Just in their meeting in the United States, Trump in front of Netanyahu said that Turkey has done a great thing in Syria, and Netanyahu agrees that overthrowing the Syrian government was a good thing. So you know, they've cooperated in Syria for years. Turkey under Erdogan transports oil. The last time I was at Istanbul airport, there were direct flights to Israel just like last year. I'm not sure. I don't think they exist now, but they have all sorts of economic intelligence cooperation and of course they have embassies. However, the foolishness of what Erdogan has done in Syria by supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda and these groups, along with Qatar and others, is that he thought he would be able to take Syria, control Syria, and it would be a part of his little mini Ottoman Empire. But the fact is that when push comes to shove, the Washington is always going to be with Israel. If Israel is not going to allow Turkey to gain any foothold in Syria that is that has that harms Israeli regime interests, and we're already seeing that. So now in Syria, Erdogan, not by destroying the country and by killing hundreds of thousands of people through his dirty war and installing an Al Qaeda, well, with the help of the US, an Al Qaeda figure who had his love fest with Petraeus, who played basketball with the head of CENTCOM, and who had Trump gave him perfume in the White House. This guy who was installed, he is not going to be able to do anything for Turkey, because he is not going to do anything that Washington doesn't want him to have. So by destroying Syria, Turkey has destroyed a a let's say a wall that protected it from the Israeli regime. There was a there was a you know a wall between Turkey and Israel, and that was Syria. So by demolishing Syria and its infrastructure and its state and having Al Qaeda in charge where all the minorities and all the moderates and everyone is like fleeing and the country is now being balkanized, Turkey has become very vulnerable, and there's and the Israeli regime is now aligning itself with Greece and Cyprus, and which I think is shameful. I mean, regardless of what one thinks about Cyprus, North Cyprus, South Cyprus, but it's shameful to be aligned to a genocidal regime, whatever circumstances. But now President Erdogan wants to come to Iran because he's sort of figured out that he's in difficulty. So it is it's a sad state of affairs, but the good news, Sabrina, is that people across the world are waking up. And in our region, people are waking up. They're waking up to the reality of what happened in Syria. They're waking up to the genocidal nature of the Israeli regime. Trump has, through his crude behavior and his open imperialistic language and the narratives. He's intensifying. He's furthering the awakening of people across the world. Again, I don't want to be naive. I think this year is going to be a very tough year. I don't think it's going. I think it's going to be a very tough year for people across the world. And you have very good guests on your show. I know that you've had economists. I've Professor Wolf and others. They speak about very knowledgeable people. They speak about tough times ahead. So I believe I don't want to say that things are going to be great, but I think that the fact that people are waking up, that is a good thing. But we'll have to see how that impacts events to come. But ultimately, I see light at the end of the tunnel. There is a God, and I, I believe that ultimately that we will at some point move beyond this era of pain and crisis and hurt and suffering.
Well said. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's always an honor.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.